And that alternative is justice.
What your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
And never again the oppression of one by another.
Let's follow the Beatles to the bone.
La lucha armada es el único camino para la liberación.
Not even Volodymyr Zelensky himself imagined that, without any prior political experience, he would be elected president of Ukraine in 2019.
Усім країнам пострадянського Союзу. Подивіться на нас. Усе можливо.
Much less would he have thought that in a few years he would become one of the most influential leaders in the world. In February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Zelensky was thrown into the global spotlight and became the face of resistance and the perseverance of democracy. As the war wages on, peace in Europe has not felt this precarious since the Second World War. For 23 years, Zelensky worked as a comedian and television host, with a few forays into film, mostly romantic comedies, which made him famous not only in his native Ukraine, but also in Russia.
You wouldn't believe that he, who was a very funny comedian, very popular and loved by the audiences, become this world leader who kind of embodies the whole nation and speaks for the whole nation and becomes, a leader. That transition is amazing, I must say.
Volodymyr Zelensky was born in 1978 in Kryvyi Rih, located in the southeast of Ukraine, where the predominant language is Russian.
Зеленский, не знаю, я с ним не общался, я его только на телевидении видел в юмористических передачах, поэтому я не знаю. Ну, вот честно, для меня он пока комик, какой с него депутат, президент, не могу сказать однозначно.
His great-grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, the only one of his 4 siblings not killed at the hands of the Nazis. Volodymyr would go on to study law, but ultimately decide to follow a different path. He founded an audiovisual production company called Kvartal 95. Zelensky's production company, along with his friend and partners, produced films, cartoons, and comedy series. Kvartal 95 became the country's most successful and prolific production company. And interestingly, one of those series, which aired between 2015 and 2019, was called Servant of the People. Volodymyr played the lead character, the President of Ukraine. In the series, Zelensky played a high school teacher whose speech went viral. It was so popular that it turned him into the face of the opposition party until it led him, almost by accident, to the presidency of Ukraine.
Why I want? I said about it many times.
To change what?
To change everything in Ukraine. To change the fight, the corruption, to stop the war. Be careful.
What undoubtedly began as satire soon became a reality, as Zelensky's friends from Kvartal 95 founded a political party with the same name, Servant of the People. And as life imitates art, the presidential candidate of the newly formed party was Volodymyr Zelensky himself. What had begun as a joke quickly became a serious run at the presidency. On the night of December 31st, 2018, Zelensky addressed the Ukrainian people through digital media and social networks. It was a fresh, enthusiastic, critical message that shook the foundations of then-president and firm candidate for re-election, Petro Poroshenko. In just 4 months, the comedian pretending to be president on TV would exit comedy to fulfill the actual role. Zelensky won, and the politics in Ukraine headed in a new direction.
Голосувати буду за команду Зеленського, так як я голосував і в першому, і в другому турі, тому що підтримую команду реформ. Вважаю, що зараз прийшов період для того, щоб молодь розвивалася. Досить 28 років грабувати країну. Потрібно дати нам новий подих.
No one imagined that in less than 3 years, Zelensky would be facing an invasion of Russian troops into Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin justified the attack as a necessary denazification of Ukraine and the disputed territories of Crimea and Donbass. That justification, however, just didn't hold merit. The Zelensky family is Jewish. They spoke Russian as well. It was Zelensky, during his career as a producer and director, who advocated strongly for the rights of Russian artists to work freely in Ukraine, for open exchange between the two nations, and for the freedom of everyone to speak Russian or Ukrainian as they chose. To the radicals of his party, Zelensky seemed dangerously lukewarm and accommodating in all matters concerning Russians and their rights to live together in peace in 21st century Ukraine. More than a few Ukrainian nationalists insisted on remembering that Zelensky's grandfather had belonged to the Soviet Union's Red Army that confronted the Nazis during World War II. Zelensky, being an ancestor of one fighting on the side of the Russians, seemed to be more important to his detractors than the fact that Volodymyr's great-grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. But against all odds, Zelensky's campaign gained many supporters. He stood mainly on two platforms: the fight against Ukrainian corruption. Ukraine had been one of the most corrupt and least transparent countries according to the 2018 indices. And a necessary plan for pacifying the disputed areas of eastern Ukraine, Crimea, and Donbass with Russia.
We want democracy and we want to Europe, because the Russia not democracy.
In our country we haven't any rule. Our government can kill the people. Our government can steal the money.
Ukrainians and Russians alike were familiar with Zelensky, but never associated him with the pestilent political caste. Zelensky stood out with his family image, always accompanied by a beautiful wife he treated with genuine affection. Olena Zelenska was born in the same city and attended the same university as Volodymyr. Today, she is a leading advocate for inclusion and equal rights for women in Ukraine. While Olena has a master's degree in architecture and is the mother of 2 children, she became one of the top executive producers at the production house Kvartal 95. She has played a major role in building her husband's career. It was a very atypical campaign and almost entirely executed digitally. Zelensky mixed political messaging with humor and music in his speeches. People loved watching him and would share his pieces with others. No one had ever created a presidential campaign as positive as it was effective. The opponents were stiff, not at all relatable, and very uncharismatic. Volodymyr was something else, something new. The Ukrainian people had not seen such a fresh candidate presenting the image of a renewed and forward-looking nation. In just 4 months, Zelensky went from an afterthought to sweeping the presidential election with 73% of the vote. Of course, Zelensky's election was not without controversy. One of his primary campaign platforms was the fight against corruption, and it was brought to the attention of the public that his campaign had actually been supported and funded by some of the Ukrainian oligarchs who had illicitly enriched themselves the most since the country's independence in 1991, when Ukraine finally gained independence from the former Soviet Union. Once appointed president, Zelensky promised the de-oligarchization of the country. But some critics advised that the spotlight would expose his own dirty laundry. It did not play in his favor that when the Pandora Papers investigated the creation of offshore companies by some public figures, Volodymyr Zelensky's name appeared on that list.
Well, broadly speaking, the president is committed to bringing additional transparency to the United States, the U.S. and international financial systems, and you can see that in policies he's proposed and supported over the course of his presidency and even prior to that. In June,
Zelensky first rose to prominence during the impeachment of Donald Trump, then President of the United States, wherein a conversation between Zelensky and Trump came to light, in which Trump pressured the Ukrainian president to help investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, and his son, Hunter Biden.
I think good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed it.
According to sworn testimony by witnesses, Trump threatened to withdraw all U.S. support for Ukraine if Zelensky did not cooperate with an investigation that would assist him in damaging Biden's public image and reputation.
Now, that's what they're accusing me of, but I didn't do it. I didn't threaten anybody. In fact, the press was asking questions of the president of Ukraine, and he said no pressure. I used the word pressure. I think he used the word push, but he meant pressure, but it's the same thing. No push, no pressure, no nothing. It's all a hoax, folks. It's all a big hoax.
Rush to embrace, the most extraordinary remedy that involves the removal of the president from office. I participated in prosecuting an impeachment case in the Senate of a federal judge. It's a very serious undertaking, obviously, when it involves a lifetime appointment on the court. It's a whole other order of magnitude when we're talking about the President of the United States.
To make matters worse, talks with Russia regarding the Donbas-Crimea conflict were not making much progress. As a result, the 8-year armed conflict between Ukrainian troops and pro-Russian separatist groups supported by Moscow continued to drag on, claiming victims and failing to achieve a ceasefire. Zelensky's popularity began declining, considered just another demagogue who in a short time had learned all the same bad habits of previous politicians. Zelensky's reputation among supporters was waning. Then Volodymyr enacted on a bold plan: the possible inclusion of Ukraine to the European Economic Community and NATO, both issues that put the Kremlin and President Putin on high alert. For Zelensky, Ukraine is an independent nation that does not need permission or consultation to associate economically or militarily with whomever it chooses in the free exercise of its autonomy.
We're just speaking about our independence. That's it. That we are deciding what we want. We are deciding what we'll do in our future.
The pro-Russian separatist and Kremlin leaders, however, believe the opposite is true. In moving closer to alignment with the West, Ukraine crossed the line and intensified the Donbas-Crimean conflict and stirred up the military and Russian nationalists. On February 24, 2022, Russia, unilaterally recognizing the independence of the areas in dispute with Ukraine, decided to invade Ukrainian territory with its troops. Given the disparity between the two armies, it was estimated that in about 72 hours, Kiev would be completely occupied by Russian troops, and Zelensky would either be imprisoned, in hiding, or killed.
The world is bearing witness to the courage of Ukraine. Our bravery will be recorded for many years throughout history, and how we have resisted the greatest tyranny in all the world. We are resisting so that you, in all the countries of the world, can also resist.
Russia would then put an allied Ukrainian leader in charge who would serve as a puppet for Moscow and solve their issue of Western influence. Putin's calculation did not work out as predicted, and Ukrainian resistance has been of impressive ferocity. Ukrainians are fighting for their land, their families, their freedom. The comedian turned president, leader of his troops, rose to the occasion in the most trying of times, to the surprise of friends and strangers alike. On one occasion, Volodymyr Zelensky went so far as to reply to world leaders who offered him a plane to fly him out of Kiev, quote, "Thank you, but the fight is here. I need ammunition, not a lift," end quote. There is a prodigious command to Zelensky's communication. He speaks as though he is talking to a friend. He is seen in military clothes, walking the streets, greeting his people, taking pictures, and eating with Ukrainian soldiers. At press conferences, he moves his chair closer to the journalist without solemn postures, ignoring all standard procedure of a traditional president. He is visibly tired, but always energetic, direct, and straightforward. He even maintains his sense of humor amidst all the tragedy he is enduring. He is not posing or playing a character, not disguised as a hero, but simply a man who assumes the enormous responsibility upon him and does so with great humility and grace.
It's not about I want to talk with Putin. I think I have to talk with Putin. The world has to talk with Putin because there are no other ways to stop this war.
Leadership, I'm grateful to every country who has taken a moral stance against Russian war machine. We can still stop Russian war machine. We can still stop the killing of people, and it will be easier to do it together, stopping the destruction of the democracy, and stop it now.
Volodymyr's popularity has not only skyrocketed among Ukrainians, but his notoriety for his leadership has transcended borders and spread across the globe. For many Ukrainians, it is as if Zelensky is the first genuine president of Ukraine in its entire history. For other countries, he represents a leader they wish to have. A few days into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as a military convoy more than 70 kilometers long approached the country's major cities, Zelensky surprised everyone with a video recorded from his cell phone. He was in Kiev, surrounded by a small group of close advisors, and he said,
Наші військові тут, громадяни суспільства тут, всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність.
A series of gestures from the former comedian confirmed what was so hard to believe. The man had taken it upon himself to stay in his country with his people. He had decided to risk his life and the lives of his people to lead the Ukrainian resistance against insurmountable odds.
is clear that he's attached to a weird, semi-mystical view of Ukraine as part of Russia, and that is a view that the Ukrainian people fervently, passionately reject, and they're showing that they will fight to reject it. Our job now is to help them, to help change the very heavy odds that they face, and that's why we're sending the support that we are.
Then Putin appeared alone in front of cameras, dressed in a suit and tie, separated by wide tables from his advisors, an image international observers have interpreted as a sign Putin feels isolated from the world. Zelensky's image contrasted by being that of one more Ukrainian bravely staying at home to defend those golden fields of wheat, and that deep blue sky that is symbolized in the two stripes of the Ukrainian flag. The Ukrainian leader responded directly in an unforgettable moment and said, "Sit down with me at a negotiating table, but not 30 meters long." That kind of gesture has inspired millions. The Ukrainian resistance is highly motivated, while the Russian troops seem disoriented, poorly trained, and lacking conviction. Nevertheless, the war threatens to drag on, and the opposition is unwilling to give in. In the meantime, Russian forces massacre defenseless civilians and tear through residential areas in the occupied territories. In a world where great leaders are conspicuously absent and people find themselves with regrettable frequency having to choose the lesser of two evils, this fresh, committed, courageous picture of a comedian turned president, and then one of the most captivating leaders the world has seen in decades, stands out. A man about whom the world knew nothing about is now suddenly on everyone's mind. We have become skeptical of our idols, never sure if what we're seeing and hearing is true. The possibility that Zelensky is a fraud, that he will ultimately end up disappointing his followers, still looms for many who wish not to be cynical at any era so compelling to be so.
Болить, больно у серці. І ми відчуваємо, що не можемо нічого таке зробити, щоб допомогти, щоб якось їм всім було легше, щоб якось знайти, як це все відробити.
The situation is disorienting, with such unsuspected twists and turns that we don't know what might happen next or what even to expect. Defeat maybe? Maybe victory? Oblivion? Hardly. Zelensky may not be a man of great physical stature, but the character of a person is measured not by how they are seen, but by the challenges they face and how they act in critical and dangerous situations. We could be witnessing the birth of a great leader at this historical moment. Someone we've all longed to see emerge and give us hope. A leader who, though we do not know the fate that awaits him, will serve as a model for leadership and bravery in the face of great adversity. Someone to inspire us to hope that a better tomorrow is possible, and that we can all be part of building that new future together.